At the height of their power, every great empire shared the same dangerous illusion, the belief that decline was impossible. Rome felt untouchable. Britain ruled a quarter of the world. Greece thought collapse belonged only to the past. Yet each of them fell, not to foreign armies, but to a silent enemy they created themselves: debt. And now, for the first time in generations, the United States is beginning to show the same signals, the same pattern, the same pressure building beneath the surface. So the real question is, what happens when the world's strongest nation enters the final stage of the debt cycle? History rarely announces disaster with a trumpet. It arrives quietly, disguised as progress, wrapped in confidence. And at the peak of its glory, ancient Rome ignored every warning. Government spending exploded, growing almost 10 times faster than real economic output. Taxes rose to crushing levels. Silver coins were melted down and diluted until they held barely a fraction of their original value. Prices spiraled. Wages collapsed. Trust evaporated. What looked like strength was only debt, piling, swelling, suffocating the empire from within. Citizens felt it first. Savings turned worthless, food prices doubled, and landowners fled the cities. Meanwhile, officials insisted everything was under control. The empire's armies were still large, its borders still wide, its reputation still powerful. But beneath that surface, Rome was hollowing out. It was the same paradox that destroys every great civilization. The moment of greatest power is also the moment of greatest fragility. Centuries later, Britain repeated the pattern. After World War II, its national debt soared to nearly 240% of GDP, a number so large it forced the empire to dismantle piece by piece. The pound lost its dominance. The United States rose to replace it. An empire built over centuries unraveled in a single generation. And then came Greece. Modern, democratic, and convinced collapse was a relic of ancient history. Yet in just a few years, its economy contracted by 25%, wiping out decades of growth. Streets filled with protests. Banks closed. Trust collapsed faster than any statistic could measure. Across time, across continents, the same invisible force appears at the peak of every empire. Debt grows faster than power. Confidence turns into complacency. And collapse begins long before anyone recognizes it. History is not subtle, but we often are blind. History does not repeat perfectly, but it repeats precisely enough to be terrifying. When you examine every major empire, from ancient Greece to Rome to Britain, you'll see the same 5-stage cycle playing out with mathematical consistency. 1. Stage 1. Confidence. The empire rises, builds wealth, and gains global trust. 2. Stage 2. Excess. Prosperity breeds entitlement. Spending accelerates. 3. Stage 3. Debt expansion. Debt becomes the silent engine keeping the system alive. 4. Stage 4. Internal fracture. Inflation, mistrust, and political division grow. 5. Stage 5. Crisis, reset. A sudden shock exposes years of silent decay. Collapse, or transformation, becomes unavoidable. This cycle never announces itself. But when you map it across civilizations, the similarities are almost identical. Example 1. Ancient Greece, the first debt default, 5th–3rd century BCE. Greece was once the financial center of the ancient world. Its city-states borrowed heavily to fund naval power, cultural expansion, and wars. In Stage 1, Athens became the symbol of wealth, philosophy, and democracy. But success led to Stage 2, excess. Massive projects like the Parthenon pushed public spending far beyond sustainable levels. To maintain influence across the Aegean, Athens demanded tribute, borrowed more, and assumed prosperity would last forever. By the time they entered Stage 3, debt had become the backbone of the empire. But wars with Sparta drained the treasury. Trade weakened. Income fell. Then came stage 4. Fracture, inflation surged. Citizens revolted. Trust in leadership collapsed. Athens defaulted on its debts, the first recorded sovereign default in history. Stage 5 arrived quickly. Athens surrendered, lost its empire, and never regained its former influence. What destroyed them wasn't the battlefield, it was the debt underneath it. Example 2. Rome, the empire, that debased itself to death. 27 BCE, 476 CE. Rome's collapse is often blamed on invasions, but the real fall began centuries earlier with economics. During Stage 1, Rome's wealth seemed limitless. Conquests brought gold, slaves, and trade. Taxes were low. Public trust was high. But expansion bred excess. Emperors funded extravagant games, public buildings, and a massive military. Spending grew out of control, 10 times faster than real economic output. When Rome reached Stage 3, it turned to the easiest tool available: currency debasement. Silver content in coins dropped from 95% to less than 5%. Soldiers demanded higher pay, prices soared, savings vanished. Rome was living on borrowed time and borrowed money. By Stage 4, the empire fractured from within. Provinces rebelled. Tax burdens became unbearable. The middle class collapsed. Inflation reached catastrophic levels. When Stage 5 arrived, the collapse seemed sudden, but it had been unfolding quietly for a century. The Western Empire fell not because it was conquered, but because its economic foundation had already disintegrated. Example 3. The British Empire, the debt that ended global dominance, 1700s–1945. Britain's rise during the Industrial Revolution marked a new era. Stage 1 was defined by innovation, colonies, and global trade. The British pound became the world's reserve currency. But building a global empire was expensive. During Stage 2, Britain expanded its naval power, administration, and military commitments across the world. Costs soared. Wars pushed Britain into Stage 3. The Napoleonic Wars, then World War I, and finally World War II, forced the government to borrow at unprecedented levels. By 1945, national debt reached nearly 240% of GDP, beyond sustainable. Then came Stage 4. The pound devalued. Britain lost its colonies one by one. Economic pressure forced the empire into retreat. And Stage 5 happened with shocking speed. Within a single generation, the world's largest empire dissolved. The United States replaced Britain as the global financial center. Reserve currency status, the greatest symbol of trust, shifted across the Atlantic. Debt didn't just weaken Britain, it ended its era. Example 4. Greece, modern era, the 21st century meltdown, 2001–2015. For decades, modern Greece enjoyed the fruits of Stage 1 and 2, trust from the European Union, cheap credit, large public spending, and rising living standards. But entering the Eurozone gave Greece access to enormous borrowing. Stage 3 accelerated fast. Public debt exceeded 180% of GDP. Tax collection weakened government spending, outpaced economic growth. Corruption scandals eroded confidence. When the 2008 crisis hit, Greece spiraled into Stage 4. Banks froze. Youth unemployment hit 58%. Social trust evaporated. Then Stage 5, the reset. Austerity measures, bailout agreements, mass protests, and a national depression that erased 25 years of economic progress. The collapse was modern, but the pattern was ancient. Across thousands of years, across different cultures, across different technologies, the pattern is always the same: confidence, excess, debt, fracture, reset. Empires don't fall from a single blow. They fall from a pattern they never take seriously. If history ended with Rome or Britain, this story would just be a warning. But the pattern didn't stay in the past. Today, The United States is standing in the middle of the same cycle, and the numbers are beginning to look disturbingly familiar. For most of the 20th century, America lived in Stage 1. Confidence. Productivity surged. Innovation reshaped the world. The dollar became the global reserve currency. Trust in the American financial system was absolute. But prosperity eventually drifted into Stage 2. Excess. Spending expanded far faster than revenue. Entitlement programs grew. Wars were financed with borrowing rather than sacrifice. Each administration, regardless of party, promised more benefits, more projects, more expansion. And slowly, the line between strength and overconfidence began to blur. Then came Stage 3, debt acceleration. And this is where the numbers turn from concerning to historic. The U.S. national debt has passed $34 trillion. Interest payments, money spent not on schools, not on infrastructure, not on defense, but just to service existing debt, are now greater than the entire defense budget and larger than spending on education and research combined. This is the same pressure point that broke Britain after World War II. And like Greece before its collapse, America now relies heavily on continuous borrowing to sustain government operations. More than $1 trillion in new debt is added roughly every 100 days. Foreign nations, once eager buyers of U.S. treasuries, are slowly reducing their exposure. Meanwhile, political division, another sign of Stage 4, fracture, has deepened. Government shutdown threats have become routine. Economic debates turn into cultural battles. Trust in institutions, once America's greatest advantage, is weakening. Even the dollar, long considered untouchable, is feeling subtle pressure. While it remains dominant, global reserves are diversifying. Gold buying has surged. Countries are experimenting with alternative payment systems. No single shift is decisive, but together they resemble the early tremors that preceded Britain's loss of reserve status. And this leads to the uncomfortable truth. If the cycle truly repeats, the U.S. is no longer in Stage 1 or 2. It is somewhere between Stage 3 and Stage 4. Debt is rising faster than the economy. Interest costs are compounding. Trust, always the final line of defense, is thinning. History whispers the same warning it gave Rome, Britain, and Greece. Collapse never feels imminent until the moment it arrives. The past is no longer a distant mirror. It is a live forecast. If there is one truth that history has proven over thousands of years, it is this. Debt is not just an economic issue. It is a law of civilizations. And, like gravity, it does not stop simply because a nation believes it is too powerful to fall. The cycle is predictable because human behavior is predictable. When nations rise, confidence expands. When confidence expands, spending grows. And when spending grows faster than real productivity, debt fills the gap. What begins as a tool becomes a dependency. And, finally, a trap. This is the heart of the pattern linking Greece, Rome, Britain, and now the United States. Not war, not invasion, complacency. For centuries, Rome insisted that its currency debasement was temporary. Britain believed it could borrow its way through global conflict. Greece thought membership in a monetary union made collapse impossible. In every case, leaders convinced themselves that their situation was unique, that their strength exempted them from the laws of economic gravity. But the cycle does not care about reputation. It does not care about military power. It does not care about global status. It only cares about math. When interest grows faster than income, collapse is no longer a question of if. It becomes a question of when. And this is the turning point the United States now faces. The empire is not weak. The economy is not broken. The dollar is not dead. But the trajectory, the direction, is following the same curve that once reshaped civilizations. Why does this pattern always hold true? Because money is trust, and debt erodes trust long before it destroys economies. When citizens see rising prices, they question leadership. When foreign nations see rising debt, they question stability. When investors see rising interest costs, they question sustainability. And once trust cracks, even slightly, the entire system begins to weaken. Silently at first, then violently. This is why empires fall slowly, then suddenly. The slow part is the build-up. Borrowing, spending, promising, deflecting. The sudden part is the moment confidence breaks. Rome looked strong the year before it fell. Britain looked unshakable until the pound devalued overnight. Greece looked modern and stable until the banks shut their doors. Strength is never the issue, trajectory is. So, when we ask the question from the hook, what happens when the world's strongest nation enters the final stage of the debt cycle? History gives a clear answer. It faces the same law as every empire before it. Not because it is doomed, but because no nation, no matter how powerful, can outrun a cycle built into human behavior itself. Debt is not destiny, but ignoring it always is. History is not a prophecy, it is a teacher. And like all great teachers, it leaves the same lesson on the table for every generation. Strength without discipline eventually becomes fragility. The United States is not Rome. It is not Britain. It is not Greece. It has more innovation, more talent, more tools, and more resilience than any empire that came before. But even the strongest foundations can crack if pressure builds long enough. And pressure does not disappear simply because we choose to ignore it. Maybe the real threat isn't collapse. Maybe it's complacency, the quiet belief that someone else will fix it, or that it won't happen in our lifetime. That is exactly the belief every past civilization held, right before the cycle completed. So the question is no longer, can it happen here? History has already answered that. The better question is, where are we in this cycle? At the turning point? Near the peak? Or already sliding into the stage where debt grows faster than solutions? And more importantly, what are we willing to do before history decides for us? No empire falls because it lacks strength. Empires fall because they wait too long to act. The next chapter of the cycle hasn't been written yet, and that means there is still time. Time to reflect, time to prepare, time to choose a different ending than the ones that came before. History shows the pattern, but the future is still unwritten, and it belongs to those who pay attention. If you want to follow how this cycle unfolds, and how past patterns may shape the world ahead, stay with me. The next stories will dig even deeper into the forces that build empires and the pressures that break them.